Hey, how's it going, everybody? Scott Spreitzer here. He is Griffin Murphy. We are Docsports.com's In the Paint. College basketball episode number 2 of what will be about 50 by the end of the season when we get into March and into early April for the Final Four. Normally, we have 3 folks on the show. Raphael Esparza has to miss this week, but he'll be back on the show next week when we start going live within the paint. We're going to talk about a lot today. What did we learn off this past weekend? Give a little talk about power ratings as opposed to the AP Top 25 and which one helps the bankroll and which one hurts it pretty badly. I'm sure most of you have already got an idea of where we're going with that. Of course, we're going to end the show with money plays and a whole lot to talk about in between, but I wanted to kick things off by mentioning the $60 free account over at Docsports.com. If you're not yet a member of Docsports, just go down below this video, click on the link, get yourself set up for a free $60 account. You can then use those free $60 on any of our daily packages over at Docsports.com. Griffin's plays, my plays, anybody else on the site. It's as easy as that. And basically what it is a great way to give Docsports.com a trial run. All right, Griffin, I know you're ready to go. Chomping at the bit. Let's get to it. A little bit of what did we learn from this past week of college basketball. And I got to tell you, this is not just from this past week. This goes over all the years that I've been handicapping and betting baskets. Same with you since you've been doing it. And that's basically, don't pay a whole lot of attention to the Associated Press rankings, because I'm going to tell you what right now, if that's what you're basing some plays on, and this is basically 101 handicapping here that we're talking to the newcomers, is that you're going to lose your bankroll pretty fast, or a good chunk of it if that's what you're looking at, and assuming that's how teams play up to the level of the AP Top 25. But I'm going to give you a reason to why you should switch that if you are new to this game. The best example to me of this past weekend were the Duke Blue Devils. They dropped from 6th to 12th in the AP poll this week, following a loss to a top 25 ranked Kentucky team on a neutral site. This wasn't a loss to Quinnipiac as a 25-point favorite at Cameron Indoor. It wasn't anything like that. Griffin, I took Duke from 4th to 5th in my power ratings. Ken Palm went from 3rd to 4th in his power ratings. The fact that this team with this nucleus of players has dropped out of the top 10 because of a loss to another top 20 program, I mean, that just tells the whole story to me when it comes to, you just don't even need to look at the Associated Press top 25.
Yeah, Scott, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean, basically the top 25, it's just a greater incentive of betting later on in the season opposed to betting early in the season. The majority of these kids end up getting drafted into the NBA, or they transferred out for various reasons. So there's more playing time, there's more chance, there's obviously national title and that type of situation. For Duke, in this instance, they brought back 4 of their 5 starters on the court. And then you look at Kentucky, on the other hand, they had a very strong program. They always do. So you can always expect big recruits coming out of these type of teams. These power rankings are very valuable when you're looking at wagering against teams that are like 1-3 early on the season, and they've yet to play any Power 5 schools. Then you get teams like Kentucky, for example. This is a pure incentive that Kentucky has better coaching, better recruiting, and just a much more organized format of playing Wildcat basketball. What we learned from this is, let's use Duke as our example. Duke, they opened up the season 2-0 before they dropped to Kentucky in a 77-72 final. It was a very hard-fought game, Scott, I have to say, by all means. But you have to look at these two programs and how dynamite they've been for decades. Duke, they were 2-0 against 2 garbage teams, all matchups at home. They took their first loss to Kentucky. That was on the road. That game followed by their 4th consecutive home game against Wofford, and that Duke was laying 24.5 points in that game. Duke beat the hell out of them in an 86-35 final, so that's your incentive. You want to look for the power-rated teams who are playing teams that have dealt with nobody on strength of schedule, Scott. And when you can find those matchups, that's when you can execute an early-on wager early on with these AP top 25 rankings. Other than that, I don't see any really pro when it looks at that. Basically what you're looking at is, how good is the organization? How did they play last season? And is that organization, have they been sustaining that talent pool for years on end? That's how I look at it currently right now, Scott.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. When you look at, the top 25, or like Ken Palm has a great power rating system. Obviously, sportsbooks have been using his numbers for many, many years now. But if you're not used to making your own power ratings and you got a full-time job and you're trying to, make a few bets here and there, and you're not able to do like Griffin and I and sit here and do this as many hours as we need out of the day because this is what we do, then you got to look for certain angles. And, I always say to people that if you've got a legitimate power-rated, let's say top 10, 15 team that's off a loss like Duke, and then they go up against a team like Wofford and they beat them by 50, as Griffin mentioned, look at a team that loves to get up and down the floor, the highly power-rated team. And if you got a team that's just completely outclassed, and we're talking like outside the top 60 or 70 in power ratings, and they also like to run a quick tempo, it's a situation where you're going to probably get a really good high-scoring game out of that top 10 power-rated team that just lost a game against a tough opponent. So some thoughts on that. And, 3 of Duke's next 4 games, Arizona, which we're going to talk about in a bit on the show. They're taking on Arizona this Friday. Also, they've got Kansas next week. They've got Auburn in a couple of weeks. That's going to tell us a lot about Duke early on, but of course, never get too much involved in what took place in November, early December when it comes to the pedigree. These great teams, the blue chippers of college basketball. You don't want to take too much of what happens in late November and think about that when you're handicapping in March. These teams are completely different when they are the pedigree, the elite of college basketball. And by the way, speaking of Auburn, a lot of times, Griffin, I'll have futures by early September for college basketball's championship game. Yeah. Last year I was down at the Circa doing some shows, and I jumped on Purdue on September 3rd at like 16-1 to win the national championship in early April. And this year I didn't really get involved that early, and I was looking at a couple of teams. And, one of the ones that I'm kind of looking at still, Griffin, are the Auburn Tigers. They're anywhere from 12 to 15-1 in that neighborhood. This team's an absolute monster at both ends of the floor. If they could quit fighting among themselves on airplane trips, as they did going into Houston last week and still won that game, this team's got a great shot. And at 12-1 or 15-1, in the whole scheme of things, I know mathematically no team should be 10-1, 5-1, 3-1. There's too many teams. But 12-1, 15-1, and what we have to play with, that's not a bad idea with the Auburn Tigers.
Scott, I couldn't agree more with you, and especially your analysis. I love the fact, they beat on Houston on the road in a 74-69 final, and Houston last season, that was the best defense in all of basketball by far, and Auburn just lit them up. Auburn beat them on the boards. They beat them on assists. They beat them on points in the paint and fast breaks. That was just the second game of the season. Auburn has returned 3 key players this season and a couple from the transfer portal. Again, it's too early to tell in my eyes what this team is capable of doing with only 1 solidified win this season. Meanwhile, Houston, they have not played anybody whatsoever. So we don't know what to expect out of Houston other than the fact that they have a phenomenal head coach with Calvin Sampson. This guy has done it year in, year out. This team is always a tough competitor. But Scott, having said that, Auburn, they're off to a phenomenal start. But now they're going to get the real battle test. They've got Iowa State coming up next on their slate on the road. And that game will be followed by Duke in Durham, North Carolina. So after these 2 matchups, Scott, we're going to know a lot more about this club when it comes to pros, cons, changes, and so forth.
Yeah, and I think I like them more in March than I even do now, and I'm a big fan of theirs right now, but doesn't mean we're going to be on them every game, obviously. Real quick, as we get into midweek matchup, I wanted to mention to folks, like the reason I took Purdue last year in September, it's the second time we've had a 1 in the previous dance, a 1 seed lose to a 16. We had Virginia a few years ago. Myself, a couple of buddies, we jumped on Virginia to win the national title in September or October of that year. Virginia won the national title. And then last year we had the same situation going into the season with Purdue off that shocking loss in the previous big dance. They had everybody back, Zach Edey especially. And they got all the way to the championship game. The big question I kept getting from people, did you hedge at 16-1? And I did not. I rarely do. I a lot of times think that hedging is chasing good money with bad money. So I'm going to stick to my story. All right, let's get to midweek matchup. We've got a big game in the Bahamas Baha Mar Championship Thursday and Friday. Baylor and St. John's doing battle in this one. Kind of an interesting, intriguing early season clash. Pair of teams in my power top 20. Griffin, I make Baylor about 2 points in this one, maybe a bucket on this neutral floor. They did get boat raced by Gonzaga in the opener, but I like the way they bounced back against Arkansas. They crushed a decent Sam Houston State squad also. And then as far as the Johnnies, man, Rick Pitino off to that 4-0 start. This will be by far their biggest test yet. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Scott, you know what? I absolutely love this team. I love this head coach, Scott Drew, one of the most respectful track records in all of basketball with Baylor, head coach since 2003. This guy rebuilt this entire club from 2003 to 2008, where he led them to their first NCAA tournament appearance. Back in 2021, the Bears finally got their national championship. And what do we know about Baylor right now? They're one of the most respected offenses in all of college basketball due to last season. They have some of the fastest guys in all of college basketball on the court, and they are dynamic from the perimeter. I mean, these guys bang from the arc. They're full of shooters, although their defense has been a bit of a cluster at times. Baylor right now 3-1 on the season, opening up the season with a brutal loss over Gonzaga. But that's what to expect. It's early on in the season. You know, you never know what you're going to get. That game was a road matchup as well. So they walked into a bad mix, got the early season jitters, and ended up getting beat down in that matchup. St. John's, they have yet to be battle tested yet, Scott. They haven't played anybody all season long. Their toughest matchup came against New Mexico. Yep. Based on strength of schedule, this team on a metric standpoint should be way stronger than they are right now. They're currently 105th in the nation when it comes to offensive rebounds, and they're 237th from the perimeter on the offensive side, with an offensive rating sitting at 77th in the nation. So how do you expect a team like this, who hasn't been battle tested all season long, to come in and deal with a Baylor team who's absolutely lit it up for decades among decades now? And they're fast, they can shoot, they can score, they can play defense. This, Scott, to me, is a perfect example of a shockwave matchup. St. John's is going to walk into the Shark Tank in this matchup, and I love Baylor here, Scott.
I'm with you. And I'll tell you what, as far as, you know, Baylor that you're talking about there, as far as what I saw out of St. John's is, I don't like the 30-plus turnovers combined in the last two games. And the three-point shooting was downright awful against New Mexico. So Baylor's forced 55 turnovers in their last three games. And that's one of the things I look for early season basketball, when guys are getting used to their new homes, if you want to say, as they transfer from other schools. I love to look at assist to turnover ratio. And I think Baylor, as you mentioned, with their quickness, can get the job done there. Behind the counter, we do this every week. Now, usually we got our man Raphael Esparza, who spent a good chunk of his adult life making numbers behind the counter. As I mentioned, he'll be back next week. So I took a shot at a couple of lines that I think we're going to see later this week, Griffin, with a couple of nice matchups, or intriguing at least. The big game, of course, on Friday, Duke facing Arizona in Tucson. And then, of course, I thought this was interesting. North Carolina taking on Hawaii on the islands. And I'll tell you why I thought it was an interesting matchup in just a bit. Both of those games on Friday, by the way. Griffin, I've got Duke power rated 2 points better than Arizona in the game at McHale Center. Power ratings. Your take on the Blue Devils Wildcats clash?
Scott, this is a perfect example of a pinpoint matchup in my eyes right now. Arizona opened up the season going 2-0, and they beat the hell out of two awful teams. Then they head into Wisconsin for a road matchup and get absolutely whiplashed by nearly 20 points. Wisconsin, they're 5-0 on the season, but every game thus far has been at home, so they're comfortable. Going into that game, Wisconsin was 3-0 at home prior to that beatdown. So what can we take from the prior matchup to, if we were looking to wager on it? Arizona. They had only played two games all season long against two garbage teams, both at home. They were obviously very, very heavily set in their comfort zone in Tucson, Arizona. Then you head into Wisconsin to play the Badgers, where they were already 3-0 at home, all home games. So this is an immediate off-balance matchup for this Arizona club. Wisconsin last season held a 14-3 record at home. Arizona had only 2 games under their belt heading into that matchup, and that rust, it showed heavily on the hardwood. Arizona, Scott, they shot 17% from the perimeter, 38% from the floor, and they out-rebounded Wisconsin 44-25. And when it came to offensive rebounds, 17-1. If that's not rust, Scott, I don't know what is. So Arizona now just got the rust shucking off. But we can look back at this, shooting 17% from the arc and 38% from the floor. And now you have to deal with the Duke team, who's been battle tested by one of the most respected teams in all of basketball. So looking at this game, Scott, I'm leaning Duke here, man. I just think that Duke is the more pivotal team. They've proven it game in, game out, season in, season out. And they've already dealt with that strength of schedule matchup that Arizona already dealt with on the road and got absolutely annihilated. So in this one, Scott, I do like Duke in this matchup, laying the 2 points.
Yeah, I don't know the folks that are watching this, if you've had a chance to watch Cooper Flagg. He's the real deal. Might be the best player in all of college basketball. Not breaking news there for Duke. And then they've got Con Knipple, doesn't get a lot of ink, doesn't get a lot of media coverage. Great player. Kaman Malawach, the big 7-footer from the Sudan. Unbelievable on both ends of the floor, but especially, he's 7'2". And I was watching him a little bit against Wofford, and Wofford had zero chance to get the ball in the paint with Malawach guarding things inside. It was either going to be adjusted on the shot too much because of the block intimidation or blocks themselves. And also on the offensive end, he can grab the lobs, man. And what that means is that Duke is going to be able to get their guards in the paint because teams are going to be looking to collapse on Malawach when they're lobbing the basketball inside and they take advantage early. So the guards can get in the paint a little bit here and attempt to draw fouls or get to the bucket and make baskets. It's a lean for me also on Dookie here. I don't like going against Arizona at McHale Center. But again, we'll see where that line breaks out on Friday morning, and maybe we'll have a play out of it by then. Real quick, also wanted to mention North Carolina, Hawaii before we get to Chalk of the Week. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, obviously Carolina is going to be a double-digit favorite, 14, 15 points here. Hawaii 4-0. They haven't played anybody yet. They have taken care of business against the teams in front of them, Griffin. And you look at North Carolina, they want to run up and down the floor, get that shot off in a heartbeat, not waste a lot of time in the shot clock. And Hawaii is going to attempt to run a very slow snail's pace. So this is the opposite of what I mentioned earlier in the show. We've got a top 10, top 25, I should say, power-rated team in the Tar Heels who are going to want to run. Hawaii at home is going to try to go deep into the shot clock, try to take North Carolina out of their tempo. The scary thing is Hawaii's terrible from the three-point line, but the good thing is they don't take many threes. They're outside the top 300 when it comes to three-point to two-point shot attempt ratio, so they don't have to worry about that much. The key to Hawaii, get to 70 points. They're 11-5-1 against the spread last year when they reached 70. I think this one lands right around the number. I think Hawaii plus the points, likely the way to go here because I think they're going to be able to throw a wrench into North Carolina a little bit. Talent level, of course, it's way different. And also, does Hawaii have a chance to win outright? No, they don't have a chance to win outright. Riley Wallace hasn't been a coach there for a long time. They don't upset top teams anymore. But still a lean for the show on me and what I think is an intriguing matchup on the islands on Hawaii plus the big points.
Scott, I hear you, man, on a lot of different levels. And the three pros for me that I have to look at for Hawaii right now is obviously they're 4-0 on the season, which is obviously a great start. Another thing that you have to always consider is when you are playing Hawaii, it's almost like you're going out of country to play in a matchup. It's like going to London. It's like going to Ireland to play these matchups. So you're going off the grid a little bit. So it's always definitely different for the comfort zone factor for a team to come in and play. For North Carolina, though, they've got 3 games already on the season. They're 2-1. They beat Elon, who's a very mid-tier, higher elite team in my eyes. They're not a bad team whatsoever. Right. They went to Kansas, lost a very hard-fought matchup. And Kansas, they're no joke. Then they went back home and completely destroyed American University. North Carolina has gotten a taste of 3 things thus far, Scott. First off, Elon, not a bad basketball team. North Carolina beat them by 25. Very, very tough road game matchup was followed by that for UNC, and they lost by 1 possession to Kansas. Then they proven to beat the hell out of a garbage team by more than 50 points against American University. UNC has played a higher mid-tier against Elon, rolled them, already got the uncomfort out of the way on the road against a very talented Kansas team, then beat the crap out of an awful team. This is a form, Scott, of consistency. And we like, as bettors, consistency. We like trends. That's what we're looking for when we're trying to make a wager. If UNC can go into Kansas and lose by 1 possession while shooting just 30% from the perimeter, what do you think this team's going to do against a team like Hawaii? Scott, I'm going to disagree with you here, and I'm going to lay the points here on UNC.
Yeah, we'll see if Hawaii throws zone at him. That's what Elon did. And Elon was leading with about 6 minutes to go in that game, and it was all about that zone. What Hawaii needs is for North Carolina to be thinking about the beach a little bit here. And not a premium play for me, but I'm thinking, I think about the beach a little bit. I've seen strange things happen on the islands. Chalk of the Week, back to the Bahamas, Thursday night, Tennessee and Virginia doing battle. And Griffin, we got the Vols. One of the quick climbers in some of the guys' power ratings out there so far this season. Virginia is looking to prove they're still a viable product after losing longtime head coach Tony Bennett right before the season. Tennessee around a 10-point favorite in this one in all likelihood. Your take?
Yeah, Scott, this is another one. Ron Sanchez taking over for Tony Bennett. And I had to say, this Virginia team's had to be one of the most perhaps boring teams I had ever watched play college basketball for years on end. This team's dialogue was strictly play defense, crash the paint, plays. It didn't matter. They were nearly averaging on the offensive side last season at one point with an incredible record, 50 points per game. That's how stout this defense was. So thus far, this offense has sparked a little bit. They got a victory over Villanova, and they put up 70 points in that game. So we truly don't know what to expect here. What we have to go back to is historical data. Last season, Virginia, they were 2-4 against the spread when playing at neutral site. 5-6 against the spread when playing on the road, and 1-3 against the spread when playing ranked opponents. I can't back this team until I see more points scored offensively and really see how they format this team with their new coach, especially on the offensive side. I lean Tennessee here, Scott, but at the same time, this is a game that I really don't want too much action on. But again, the lean, Scott, will be with Tennessee in this matchup.
Yeah, the Vols lost, 5 of their top 7 scores from last year. They were 37th in fewest turnovers per possession last season, but they had 20 turnovers and only a dozen assists against Louisville, which I guess you can call that their one step-up game of the season, but you got to be careful about, talking about Louisville as a real big step-up opponent, but that's the situation. 20 turnovers in that game worried me a little bit. That does concern me, along with the fact that both teams are going to slow it down. Virginia is going to play at the slowest pace possible, and Tennessee likes to play at a slower pace this year too. If I could get, 4 buckets out of this one, I might have to jump on the dog. Also going to be looking at the under here if it's not, overly adjusted by the books. I heard they're pretty sharp behind the counter. That's what I've heard at least. But I think you're going to see an extremely slow game. If you're looking for excitement, as Griffin said, you hardly ever look to Virginia. And in this particular matchup, you're not looking at this game for excitement, but we could have a decent play as far as a premium play on the total or the underdog when it comes time and we get to see those opening numbers. Money plays in just a minute. That's our best bets of the week. We'll get to those. Real quick note and reminder again that you can get a $60 free account. If you're not yet a member at Docsports.com, just go down below this video, click on the link, sign up for the free 60, and you can use those free $60 on any of our daily packages. Of course, Thursday, when it rolls around, it's Football Thursday when Griffin and I and everybody else at Docsports.com will release our football package through the entire week, right through Monday Night Football. So be sure to check out for that. And, of course, daily sports, NBA, college baskets, pucks, the whole shebang, props, all of that good stuff each and every day. Check out our pages on DocSports.com. All right, Griffin, I'll let you go first and do the honors. Your money play, your best bet on this week's show.
Money shot, Scott. Let's do it. So New Mexico State at Dayton. This is very quick breakdown, sweet and simple. Dayton, they're coming into this game 4-0 on the season. They've already been battle tested by Big Ten Northwestern. They gave them their only loss, putting them at 3-1. This will be Dayton's 5th consecutive home game. This team has yet to play on the road, so they're coming into this game with a lot of comfort. Then you go to New Mexico State. They're 3-0 on the season. We can anticipate the market is going to show them a little bit of love considering the fact that they are undefeated. New Mexico State, they have had the easiest schedule you could possibly imagine, and they barely pulled off a win against Texas A&M Corpus Christi at home in an 83-82 final. Scott, looking at this game right now, going back to last season, Dayton went 15-0 at home. They are currently 4-0 at home right now. Currently 2-1 against the spread at home and 2-1 against the spread at home as favorites. Give me Dayton here as my money shot best bet.
Like it. I'm going to go to a neutral site game this Friday, and it's Wisconsin taking on Central Florida in this contest. And, Wisconsin's going to be laying about a bucket or so. It kind of depends on what happens with UCF on Tuesday night, but they should handle, I believe it's Tennessee Tech they're playing. But Central Florida does on a home win over at A&M. We do know that. They had a huge advantage at the charity stripe. They were afforded 31 free throw attempts to 18 for the visitors. A&M, they outscored the Aggies 22-8 at the charity stripe in that game. Yet Central Florida trailed by 11 points with a little more than 6 minutes to go. Fortunate 3-point win for the Knights. I don't think they're going to be all that fortunate here. I know the Badgers knocked off Arizona, so they might be reading the press a little bit, the press clippings. But the bottom line is, and speaking of free throws, Wisconsin and Arizona combined for 87 free throw attempts in that game last week. You want to talk about a snore fest, 87 trips to the free throw line. I don't think we're going to see anything like that today. I think Wisconsin's a little bit too good for Central Florida. Again, And I look at what Wisconsin did against Arizona. I didn't see a luck factor there, and I like to think about those things when I'm handicapping any sport. I did see a lot of luck factor when it came to Central Florida's win over A&M. So I'll back Wisconsin for my money play here. And listen, folks, don't forget, we're here each and every Tuesday. The video's up all week long over at Docsports.com on the YouTube page. And, of course, we're talking about games that are down the road, so you can check them out, go back and see why we like certain teams if you missed part of the show. And, of course, that $60 free account. Real quick note, Raphael will be back with us next week, so we'll be really digging behind the scenes when we go behind the counter. For Griffin Murphy, for our producer, Michelle, I'm Scott Spreitzer. He's Griffin. We're DocSports.com's In the Paint. You know what to do, everybody. Let's put them in the win column. We'll talk to you next week.